Hello, Alastair. Good to meet you. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, Emma. Thanks for having me.
So, can we start then by getting to know you a little bit about why did you come to Quakers? When was that? And tell us a bit about what were you seeking and what did you find?
Oh, what were you seeking? Where are you going? What did you find along the path? Hi. Well, Emma, I was born of an English mother and Scottish father. I was born in Doncaster in England in 1955 when my Scottish father, whose family roots were both in the Highlands of Scotland and the Lowlands, and also in the say Highlands and borders of Scotland, met my English mother when, as a young doctor, having graduated just after the Second World War from Edinburgh University, he got his first job in the Doncaster Royal Infirmary, where my mother was the nursing sister in charge of the children's and acute clinical wards. So they got together in that era, and I was the came out in 1955, and then my sister a year later. My father was desperate to get back to Scotland, and in 1959, the practice of North Lochs in the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides was advertised in the British Medical Journal. And my father laid it aside. He thought it'd be too far out for my mother, who loved shops and fashion and normal things like that. And my mother felt, not for the first time in her life, she felt a totally irrational reaction come over her. And she started crying and felt he had to apply for this post. And so he did. And in 1960, when I was 4 years old, we moved to the Isle of Lewis, living in a house with we got our drinking water off the roof, our washing water off a peat well. We were 3 miles from the nearest other house. And then a few years later, 3 years later, when I was seven, we moved into the main surgery house in the village of Lurbost where I went to school, and um, met with friends who, I'm still close to even now, all these years later. So I had one foot in the world of Scotland, partly a foot in the world of England, having had 4 years of early life there. But also, and more significantly, perhaps, one foot in a peasant, in the positive sense of that word, crofting or small scale farming and fishing way of life, and the other foot in the middle class world of a medical family of that era, where we would have visiting consultants, we would have the chief constable of police and people like that come and have dinner with us when they were on the island. That was the way things worked in those days. So I had a very wide exposure. But spiritually, the interesting thing is that it was a highly Presbyterian community. My mother had grown up with no particular religion. She wasn't religious in that conventional sense. My father, his family had been Plymouth Brethren in Edinburgh, and he became Church of Scotland, mainstream Presbyterian. So I was raised in a Church of Scotland community in a predominantly Free Church of Scotland community, which is very conservative. They would say these days evangelical, but not in the American sense, but in a sense that I've come to see had a very deep social conscience, expressed as a very powerful understanding of what community is. So I grew up in my early childhood experience within that context.
Gosh. So, how did this get you to Quakers then?
Excuse me, and I made my cup of tea quickly just by by tipping the tea leaves in, and I have a tea leaf to prove the matter right here. Let me put it back in the cup. Um, one of the consequences of living at such a time in such a community is that a doctor was one of the learned people in the community, along with the school teacher and the minister. And so people would come to the house and talk about deep and serious matters. You didn't often have trivial conversations around the dinner table. People would talk about state of the world issues. They would talk about religious issues a lot. Was there evidence for life after death? Um, is hell and heaven a reality? Does Christianity matter? Is Christianity literal? Um, is it only the King James 1611 authorized version of the Bible that we should have, or should something like the where is it gone? The here we are, the New English Bible that our Church of Scotland minister presented me with in 1971-72. Look at his beautiful writing there,
Thank you.
The Reverend Colin MacLean who was from Uig in the island and was a wonderful minister because for us, as we got older, he ran a Bible class where he encouraged our skeptical questions. It's not the kind of thing you'd associate with Highlands and Islands Presbyterianism, but he very much encouraged our questions and encouraged us to think about these matters. So he said to me, "You're not an atheist, Alastair, from what you're saying, but you're an agnostic." I said, "What's that?" He said, you're basically saying you don't know whether there is evidence for the existence of a God." And I said, "Yeah, that sums it up perfectly, Colin. Thank you very much." And he was hugely helpful to me because when I went to university and started failing my exams, because I was more interested in reading books about things like mysticism than I was in studying physics, chemistry, geology, and geography, which my first four subjects at Aberdeen University when I went there in 1973. Colin said, don't worry, Ian and Jean," he said to my parents. "He's using university the way it is meant to be used because he's an intellectual." And that rather impressed my mother. It didn't much impress my father, who really almost until the time he died in 1986, he died quite young. Doctors in those days, as he did, could smoke up to 60 cigarettes a day, and that got the better of him. Um, and so, but really until his deathbed, my father was pretty disappointed in the path I was following, because I was interested in these. I wasn't interested in sort of career success and that kind of thing. I was interested in these deep questions in life. So when I got to Aberdeen University, the 1970s, I was there 73 to 77, it was kind of like the 1960s countercultural revolution that took root in America, only kicked off in the north of Scotland in the mid 1970s. So I was kind of hitting the epicenter of that. There was all this new music coming out, Pink Floyd, Moody Blues, Mike Oldfield, all that old hippie, trippy kind of stuff was coming out. And you're discussing these ontological questions about life and death, meaning, state of the world, what was the future going to be like? These would be commonplace student discussions, certainly in our cohort. And I somehow got connected up with a university chaplaincy service where the Reverend Alan Main, a Church of Scotland minister, was the chief person there. And he was another of these wonderful Church of Scotland ministers who was very good at opening questions and putting on events and having discussion groups. And that deepened my agnosticism, but it also deepened my passion for the question, is there not a spiritual reality? I got heavily into investigating parapsychology, because it seemed to me that the apparent existence of telepathy, of near-death experiences, mystical experience, things like that were indicative of there being a spiritual reality. I was studying science. I remain very committed to the scientific mindset, which is based on seeking evidence. And so, even today, I don't know if I can tilt my camera and show you, but I mean, that whole bit of the shelf up here is full of books like, well, there is the Psychology of Religion by Edwin Diller Starbuck, who was
Mm.
I think it was Illinois Quaker family, who really
Right.
sparked off the serious study of what we would now call transpersonal psychology,
Yeah.
spiritual psychology. And basically, he carried out a study of religion that William James drew, well, here's Edmund Burke, sorry, Raymond Morris Burke, Cosmic Consciousness, from that same era, published around about 1901 or thereabouts. And it was out of that ferment of study that William James gave his Gifford Lectures here in Scotland, the Gifford Lectures in Natural Religion
Right.
at Edinburgh University in, I think it was 1900 to 1901, he gave them in. And this remains really the seminal book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, that established the field of studying these things. I've got a whole lot of more recent books there, including from the Alastair Hardy Centre, which I'm sure you'll have heard of. So that was the kind of direction I was moving in. And coming to the conclusion that there was indeed considerable evidence that could help to relax the intellectual rigor that said you've got to be an agnostic. And really, the next major thing was that having successfully failed my first year chemistry and then successfully failing my second year geology, a wise advisor of studies said to me, well, Alastair, you could just repeat them, or you could instead study, let's see what would fit the timetable, moral philosophy. And how about psychology? So I studied both moral philosophy and psychology for 2 years to what was then called advanced level, as part of my Bachelor of Science degree that majored in geography at the end, which came quite naturally to me. And with those, I then applied to do voluntary service overseas in 1977. And I told them I was hoping I might get posted to India and meet a guru. Because, those were the old hippie, trippy trail that were on. Where did I put that book that just came out about Ralph Metzner? It's probably downstairs, is it? It's not down here. I've got a fest. If you go on my website, you'll see I happen to have known Ralph Metzner of the original counterculture trio from Harvard University, along with Timothy Leary and Ram Dass. I am afraid it's downstairs. And if you go on my website, you'll find the fifth chapter that I've got about Ralph that has just been published in a book about his life. So basically, I applied to do VSO, hoping that I would get posted to India or somewhere like that and meet a Hindu guru, because I'm very taken by insights from the Hindu faith, from the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads in particular. They have been particularly important to me because books like, well, there they are here, that's the Penguin Classics translation of the Gita and the Upanishads. I highly recommend Juan Mascaro's translations because what Mascaro does in his introductions is he links Eastern faith, primarily Hinduism, primarily the Vedic scriptures, with Christian metaphysics. So it is through Hinduism that I made sense of the mysticism of the Gospel of John. And I realized that there was far more to Christianity than you tend to get in the mainstream sort of sermon. Anyhow, instead of being posted to India, VSO posted me to Papua New Guinea and to a Roman Catholic mission headed up by a retired Australian archbishop called Virgil Copas and four Mother Theresa missionary of charity nuns. Now, what that did, Emma, was it grounded my intellectual interests in faith, in solidarity with the poor.
Mm.
Bish, as we called the Archbishop, Bish was very into Vatican II. He was also into charismatic spirituality, which it took me a while to understand what he meant by that. He meant the movement of the spirit. And so, in his sense, Quakerism would be a charismatic religion because we too are about the movement of the Holy Spirit, deeply understood. And so here I was amongst these people. The bishop lived alone in his so-called archiepiscopal palace in Gulf Province, Kerema, one of the poorest areas of Papua New Guinea, sometimes called the asshole of Papua New Guinea because of the huge rivers bringing mud and sludge down. You wouldn't find much coral to swim amongst there. An area recognized to be a difficult area, although interestingly one that had been well documented by missionary anthropologists in the early 20th century, people like F.E. Williams and so on. And he lived alone in this ramshackle building. And at night, I kid you not, you would have to tiptoe through his living area because there would be about 20 homeless people sleeping on his floor. And you'd find him upstairs in his small study with a simple single bed there. He would invite all of us volunteer teachers over to tea at 4 o'clock each afternoon. I was the only one that went because the others all thought he was mad. They had no time for him because you'd go for tea and you'd sit there and he would say nothing. But it was spiritual contemplation, or you'd say very little. You'd be in that presence. And what a way to end, a fraught day, because things were always fraught and unexpected there. 20 minutes sitting with the bish, having a cup of tea and a biscuit. And then later you'd see him pacing up and down the church as he did his office at night. And sometimes I would just go and sit there. So I was exposed to people like that. And then the nuns also, the holy sisters, as I like to call them. These women who had devoted their life to service to the poor and to prayer with God. And I would have conversations with them also. Their work was often not very practical. They would do, the missions of charity then, at any rate, they had a thing that what mattered was being with the poor, not so much the effectiveness of the work you did. So it was basically sticking plaster stuff they did. Only one of them was a trained nurse. But what a spirit. I mean, their spirit stays with me to this day. How many years on now? I'm 69 now. So about 50 years, nearly 50 years on, that spirit stays with me.
Mm.
I then came back from Papua New Guinea, and I suppose that's when the Quaker story begins. Let me pause for breath.
Yeah, gosh, I mean, it's such a backstory, isn't it? And you're the first person I've spoken to who's mentioned Hinduism as a particular gateway into
Mm,
Christianity.
mm.
A lot of people mention Buddhism. So that's fascinating. Um, and
I
how,
think there's an important difference. Buddhism is what the theologians would call apophatic. It says it's not this, it's not that. it strips away. In fact, in that respect, Buddhism, as has often been remarked, is very similar to Calvinism. You know, you go into a Calvinist church, there'll be no ornamentation or anything like this. Whereas Hinduism is cataphatic. You go kata as in catacombs, like caves. You go into it. You can say God is love, God is joy, God is. It's an affirmative approach, and I like both. But I think a lot of Westerners are drawn to Buddhism because they don't need to make any commitment with it. You can have kind of spirituality, but not have to be too
Mm.
specific as to what it means.
Mm.
Whereas with Hinduism, I mean, you've got Krishna, you know, right there. Where's that beautiful little book I've got of Indian? Here we are. Here we are. This Indian artist. Um, the Life of Christ by an Indian artist, and there you see Christ and the Hindu gods um, represented. And there's a stilling of the storm. Look at that.
Mm.
They awake him and say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? And he arose and rebuked the wind and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. Ah, you know, I I love that. I love this kind of stuff. The bishop, forward by the Bishop of Calcutta, interestingly. Um, but you know, with Hinduism, you've got Krishna right there amongst the gopi girls and so on. You've got him in the chariot with Arjuna on the battlefield of life. I love it that in Juan Mascaro's Bhagavad Gita, the opening words, the very first verse, is that Dhritarashtra, the blind king, why is the king blind? Because political power is always spiritually blind.
Mm.
Dhritarashtra says to his eagle-eyed charioteer, Sanjaya, spiritual charioteer, on the field of truth, on the field of Dharma, which Mascaro translates rightly as on the field of truth, on the battlefield of life, what came to pass? Sanjaya. And the Gita unfolds from that, the telling of that story. Now take that backwards. What came to pass? What happens in the present moment? On the battlefield of our lives, within the fullness of our lives. But that in turn is nested into the field of truth, into the Dharma, into what Christ called the way, the truth, and the life. You see how I'm melding it together? Some people would say that's syncretism, that's adding bits and pieces of God from God knows where into something that doesn't actually fit. I see it as speaking to a common spiritual basis of reality, fragments of which you find in all faiths.
Mm.
I find in this kind of take from Hinduism, especially, I find I find a depth of metaphysical insight that is missing from most Christian preaching.
Mm.
And that then brings me around to Quakerism, because then come the mid 1980s, I was back in Scotland, I was married, I was working for a charity, I'd done an MBA, Master of Business Administration degree to make myself more useful to the world. And one day in the Observer, I saw, they used to have those adverts for that little book, A Light That Is Shining. Have I got it here? By Harvey Gilman. You may remember the days when the Quakers used to advertise that little book. No, I don't have it there, I don't think. You may remember that little book, A Light That Is Shining. And I sent off for it. And I read it and I thought, well, this is what I am. This is what I am. So my then wife, my first wife, Dory, and I, we went along to Edinburgh Quakers. She hasn't stayed with that, but I very much stayed with the Quaker thing. I feel this is what I am. Um, so it's, unfolded since then.
So you're a Quaker, Alistair. How do you describe yourself? Are you a Christian?
Yes. So one of the things that attracted me to Quakerism, first of all, is that you didn't have to be Christocentric. I very much see myself as a universalist Quaker. Now, the term universalism is used in different ways in theology. Um, Normally, it's used to mean the belief in universal salvation, that everybody is ultimately saved, as you would put it. Well, I take that as a given, but in a Quaker context, it's also used to signify interfaith, at least as I have seen it being used and understand it being used in the Quaker context. So I very much see myself as a universalist in that interfaith sense. But over the years, and especially as I've encountered the insights of Orthodox theology, theology from Russian emigres, like where have they gone? Here, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? How can I can never find my books? But I put myself on the spot. Here we go. Here we go. Um, I mean, this wonderful book by Olivier Clément, The Roots of Christian Mysticism, text from the patristic era with commentary.
Mm.
Mind-blowing stuff. And then similarly, another Russian emigre, Paul Evdokimov, In the World of the Church. I mean, I just open it. Well, it's one of the pages I've got dog-eared because I use my books like tools, as you can see. So imagine reading this, here I am coming out of a Presbyterian context where heaven and hell were black and white realities, and hell was for the damned, and you were considered damned before you were even born because that's how God made you. And then in, you come to this kind of theology. The freedom to refuse God is his wish for us without limits. The suspended power of human choice renders our destiny conditional. And it is hell, therefore, to speak of divine love, the heavenly dimension of hell, the divine vision of humanity immersed in the night of solitude. It is of the greatest urgency to correct the terrorist and penitentiary idea of God. It is no longer possible to believe in a heartless God incapable of suffering. The only message which could reach atheism today is that of Christ descending into hell. As deep as the hell in which we find ourselves, it is even more profound to find Christ already there waiting for us. Now, what do you mean by Christ in that respect? My understanding of Christ is the human face of God. If you go to most conventional churches today, certainly to a church of Scotland, you'll see the minister will give the blessing with a gesture like this, these three fingers, the thumb and next two fingers together, like the reforms, so-called reforms of the Russian Orthodox introduced under, was it Tsar Nikolai, something like that, introduced reforms which differentiated between the new faith and the old believers. But the new form of blessing was to emphasize the Trinity. Now, I've never been a great one. I see the point of the Trinity, but never a great one for obsessing about it. But the older form of blessing was this. You still had the three, you still had the Trinity in there, but the focus was on the hypostatic union. The hypo what? Hypo is in a hypodermic syringe. Hypo means to go under, to get under the skin of, hypodermic. That's what it means. Hypostatic, underneath the stasis, underneath the standing, the status of things. In other words, to get beneath the surface of things. A hypostatic reality in theology is what gets beneath the surface. What surface are you getting beneath? You're getting to the reality that Christ is both human being, or as they would say traditionally, man and God. The two together, that is the meaning of the incarnation. Now, that's how I read the Bhagavad Gita was Vishnu's incarnation as Krishna. That also is hypostatic reality of the divine becoming human and saying that to be fully human and to become fully human is to realize our divine nature. As one of the letters to Peter in the New Testament puts it, to become partakers or participants in the divine nature. That is the mystical journey. And my experience was that Quakerism gave the freedom to explore that. Quakerism gives us the freedom to enter into that depth of mystical understanding where we might start like I did, not wanting the Christian aspects of it, but seeing it as a kind of useful framework in which an interfaith perspective could be played out. But then gradually coming to see the point of the Christian thing. And one of the hopes I have just now with the revision of our books of discipline is that they do not throw that out.
Mm,
I'm not up to speed with what is going on with that process,
mm,
but I hope that our processes do not throw that out. I've been very concerned in recent years, sometimes to see, and I think it's changing now, but some of what I've seen in terms of how non-theism has played out. I
mm.
remember ministering in Glasgow meeting once, and as soon as I'd finished, somebody shot up in front of me and said, I hate it when people talk about God in meeting. Well, that was where that person was at, but it also puts a damper on what we're about.
Yeah.
And the problem is that if we don't have a sense of divine interconnection at the heart of what we're about, it makes no sense of our meeting process, our meeting for worship process, which is about waiting on the movement of the Spirit, not just any old spirit, but the Holy Spirit, the spirit that gives life, the spirit that is life, the spirit that is life as love made manifest, and which expresses spirituality as that profound interconnection between us that Jesus likened to us all being branches on the one vine. And so to me, Quakerism as a mystical path, a path that allows for common holding, not an individualistic spirituality, not clearing off to our cave and contemplating our navel, but collectively with one another, waiting on the movement of that which most deeply interconnects us and transcends us above our ego limitations. That is what is so important about Quakerism. At which point you can probably shut off the recording because I could. No, 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 no. It's okay.
Mm.
But you see my point. I'm basically saying that's the nub of it. That's the nub of it. In a way, I need say no more than what I've just said there. It really gets to the essence of it.
But where have we got to then, Alistair? Because I, like you, in a very similar way, I came to Quakers because I loved the freedom and didn't really want to have a highly Christian
Hmm.
setting. And
Yeah.
gradually I've come to see the beauty and amazing wisdom of it.
Mm,
And
mm, mm,
that is what gives you this wellspring or this living fountain or
mm.
however you want to phrase that, whatever metaphors you use, which
Yeah.
means you don't get drained by the the weariness of all the things that you're having to do with the meeting house and etc. etc.
Mm,
I think this is the only thing that gives life, and it worries me that Quakers are drifting. It
yeah.
seems. perhaps even thoughtlessly away from it. And like you, I'm worried about the Book of
Mm,
Discipline revision as well.
mm,
And one of the reasons why I want to start these interviews with a deep study, if you like, an
mm,
introduction to
mm,
each
mm,
person in the spiritual religious way, is
mm,
because, quite honestly, I want to know who you are spiritually
mm,
before I listen to your opinions on this, that, and the other.
mm,
And one of the things that worries me is that people are speaking and ministering, perhaps even, or certainly having influence and power and making decisions
mm,
without necessarily that deep foundation.
mm,
And these are the things that worry me. And then if these voices become more and more amplified, we will end up with a book of discipline, which is wholly inadequate to the task of the world. I mean, the world is changing
yeah,
rapidly, and we see,
exactly. Mm,
we see
mm,
friends at the moment in Britain, I think, not coping that well with it.
mm. No, we'll fail our calling. We will fail our calling. And I think what's so important with Quakerism is that we allow stepping stones. We allow people to come in from wherever they might be coming. Anybody can walk in off the street and can minister in one of our meetings the very first time.
Mm.
I don't know any other religious denomination that allows that, not only allows, but values that kind of thing. However, it's also not for nothing that we have an eldership structure. And let's not be deluded into thinking that elders don't matter. Let's not be deluded into thinking that we are all absolutely spiritually equally in terms of being at the same level of where we might be at. The reason we have elders is because those who have gone before us have recognized the need for spiritual experience to guide the meeting. Now, what's been going wrong with that in recent years, certainly over the past 20 years or so? What's been leading to the problems we're discussing? I think because our very openness has led us to be a place of refuge for so many who have been injured by mainstream religion.
Mm.
And Ben Pink Dandelion in his Where Are You, Ben? Come on out when I'm looking for you. Here you are. There we are. His Swarthmore lecture, which our Glasgow meeting is going to be discussing
Mm.
fairly soon. He has this wonderful. See, it'll be one of the bits I've got dog-eared. It's somewhere around here. Is it? Oh dear. Let me just bear with me one moment. I'll see if I can. I'm not going to be able to lay my hands on it quite so cleverly this time. Um, he basically has a. Oh, here we are. Here we are. He says, it's getting dark in this room. Are you seeing me okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. He's saying here on page 57, the challenge is that for too long we have presented Quakerism not in terms of this is who we are, you're welcome to come along, but rather, hello, who are you and what do you like Quakerism? What would you like Quakerism to be for you? We have wanted to help those damaged by previous affiliations, but have not helped them reconcile themselves to their past experiences. Therefore, sometimes the damaged are damaging.
Mm.
And I really think he's spoken an uncomfortable truth there, a truth we need to be very aware of. I had a young man in here today. He's just graduated from Glasgow University with a first class honours. And on Sunday, I won't be at our Quaker meeting on Sunday. I only get along about once a month anyway. But on Sunday, he's asked me to be with him and a group of about 30 young people who are exploring the roots of the Scottish state and where Scotland might be going. And he feels, Don, he's actually from a free church family background ancestrally in the Isle of Lewis. But he feels that the religious dimension of Scotland is not treated seriously enough in the modern day academy. And so he's asked me, along with various other speakers, but he's asked me to speak to them on religion and the states. And so as part of that, I pulled off my shelf The History of the Working Classes of Scotland by Tom Johnson, a former Secretary of State for Scotland. And I've just, oh dear, stopped my pen. I was just reading to him. I was discussing with him today a passage here that is this it? Yeah. Discussing how both on the Catholic side and on the Protestant side, during what were called the killing times of the 17th century, there was such brutality in the name of religion. And the people, whichever side it was on, it was the landowning classes, the classes that owned, that controlled economic power, that were driving it. And you may know a lot of my work is with land reform in Scotland. That's been the main work of my life, I suppose, land reform in a practical sense. But he's been discussing the terrible punishments and tortures that will be meted out for religious infringement. And there's a passage here that I've triple marked. Beneath the dramatic struggle of the sorry, this fact must be borne in mind when we are considering the disciplinary rigor with which the moral codes and the parish social legislations were weighted against the peasant, whether under the curates of episcopacy, a bishop-based Anglican type system or Catholic system, or under the ministers of presbytery, the Protestant system. Beneath the dramatic struggle of the systems and sects, under the rule of each and of both, the poor were branked and stalked, in other words, tortured, gouged, their eyes or their ears gouged out, and imprisoned and publicly admonished with a harshness and a cruelty which has left its mark in the cringing, submissive spirit in which the Scots rural peasant regards, even to this day, his be-collared betters. Now, when you see people, often because of their sexuality, who have felt badly treated by mainstream religion, by what Pink Floyd in the final cut call the cold and religious. By the cold and religious, I was taken in hand, shown how to feel good and made to feel bad, or words to that effect. And then, because the spirit is still alive in them, they think, where can we find spiritual expression? And they hear about the Quakers and they come along to us. You get a lot of folk coming together who've been badly burned by things. And there's Johnson saying this is intergenerational, this gets knocked on. And I think that as a religious society, we've not been sufficiently wised up to what it is that we're receiving and how we need to hold that and help these folk in their suffering, help them in being accepted, but also point them to the real gospel, point them to the gospel of love, point them to the Beatitudes, point them to the non-violence of our tradition. I worry that our non-violence is running thin because we don't understand the meaning of the cross. We don't understand what it means to be persecuted and say, even if you're going to kill me, I will not take up arms, as Jesus says in John's Gospel, where he says, if I was an ordinary sort of king, my followers would take up arms and free me. But my kingdom, or my community, as I would translate it as being, my community is not of this world. We need to understand this. Our forebears understood it, Fox understood it, albeit in his rumbustious way. We have tended to forget it, and we've forgotten it because we have lost our Christian mysticism to some extent, to a sufficient extent to have corporately gone thin on it. Some Quakers still understand it. I think that really needs to be drawn out. That really needs to be drawn out. And, then these ways in which so many folk are vexed by their sexuality and whatever it might be, starts to fall into place. You're fundamentally loved for you, whoever you are, whatever. That's the power we're talking about. As Raymond Panikar, another Gifford lecturer. Where are you, Panikarji? Here we are. I happen to have my Quaker type books closest to hand here, but that's Panikar's Rhythm of Being, his Gifford lectures that he gave here in 1990-91 in Scotland, the rhythm of being. And Panikarji says only forgiveness breaks the power of karma, breaks the bonds of karma. Only forgiveness breaks those knock-on effects by which we are locked into the past. That is a deeply Christian insight. If you ask me what is it that Christianity brings to the table of world faiths, because I think different faiths bring different
Yeah.
emphasis of insight. And to me, it is the power of forgiveness. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. How many times shall we forgive them? Will it be 7 times? No, I say unto you, 7 times 70. In other words, perpetual forgiveness. My goodness, it's a demanding thing, Emma. I had a thing recently in the past week where I was quite seriously wronged by somebody. And I have literally in myself had to sit with that text and hold that person in my mind. How many times? Not 7, but 7 times 70. And then where did that come from when you don't feel like it? Because you have been damaged by something that they have done. You have to ask for power beyond your own ego. You have to ask to be held in the God space. You have to be asked to be held, and in the case of forgiveness, the person who has wronged you, mutually to be held in the hand of God.
And what worries me, Alistair, is the Quakers in Britain today, I think have lost their way in a lot of this. And what you were saying is music to my ears here. Um, and I just worry that there's an awful lot of noise.
There's an awful lot of noise. Yeah, yeah,
And
mm,
and for a
mm,
religious group that talks about silence, we have an awful lot of
yeah.
noise and
Ah,
statements and all sorts going
yeah.
on. I
Mm,
fear we have a huge centralized bureaucracy that
mm,
doesn't really help. You talk about our eldership structures. I don't even think they're particularly effective, and I think we need to do something about them.
mm.
Um, because I agree with you. I think elders are crucial, but
Yeah.
I'm not
Mm.
entirely convinced that we have the right form of how do we how do we nominate and keep the right elders in a meeting?
I
Um,
think it's so difficult because, and I am guilty of this also. Because my hearing, I have severe to profound hearing loss. And even with the most expensive hearing aids you can get, I can't really follow in meetings. I have to use little microphones I individually attach to people in many audiological situations. So I don't pull my weight in terms of actual administrative type stuff. I do in terms of things like this. I do a lot of writing and speaking on Quaker issues. But in terms of the hard work of maintaining premises, of balancing the books, of even being on the door, if you're deaf functionally and you're not picking up people using each other's names, and you've not got a particularly good memory for names anyway.
Mm.
I mean, I hardly know the names of most of the people in our meeting. It's terribly embarrassing to say so. They used to have a photo thing, but then because of safeguarding, they've taken that down. And I just, I cringe at situations where you're meant to know somebody's name to welcome them, and you just don't. And unless you explain to each person, they won't
Well, I mean,
understand.
I have a deep understanding of that because my hearing is probably not quite as bad as yours, but I miss much more than people think I do.
Mm.
But I think there are ways around that, Alistair, and I think there's ways in which, this is what accessibility means, is that the meeting needs to find a way to benefit from your wisdom and find a way to help you hear what is happening so that we can hear your ministry.
But to be fair to our meeting is really good to me. They ask me they ask me to share at events, to speak at events, and so on. If I want to say anything to our meeting, I can ask for space and I will be given it. So there's not actually a problem like that. But I am aware that I really all I'm saying here is that I am one of those who does not put a lot of input into things like making the teas and coffees and um, the hard work on the ground. Um, we are so thin strung out like that very often.
Mm, mm.
Oh, I mean, I have, where are we here? Yeah, there we go. The friend. I think the friend does quite a good job of giving airspace to different points of view. You get quite a bit of mystical and Christian writing in the friend. Um, here's one about Christmas and the shepherds. Can you see how revolutionary this message was? Rebecca Hardy wonders where all the women are in the nativity. Um, that's
Yeah, yeah.
there's quite a lot of good stuff there. But as you know, the friend is really struggling because not enough people are subscribing to it. Here's Harvey Gilman wondering if friends could be more positive about their faith. Sometimes I wish we would not be so afraid of declaring what we have found. I
Mm.
mean, that's serendipitously, you see.
Yeah,
That is basically what I think we're saying just now,
yeah.
that I think we need to declare what we have found. I think that is a task for what are sometimes called weighty friends or the eldership function.
So
So we
what?
have we have still got this, but let's be very careful that we don't throw it out,
Yeah,
especially with this
yeah.
discipline revision thing. That in the name of inclusion may exclude the very thing that makes the inclusion possible.
Mm. So what are your hopes and fears for Quakers in Britain then to finish?
Well, my hopes are that people will find it and our movement will be able to hold them, provide what Parker Palmer, the American Quaker, calls spaces hospitable to the soul. Our meetings should be spaces hospitable to the soul, spaces where people can unfold spiritually, where they are received, where they are at, including with their woundedness, and help to move through on a journey. At the same time, as I sometimes put it, because I'm involved, I'm speaking to you here from Govan in Glasgow, a hard-pressed part of Glasgow, where I'm very involved with poverty issues in the local community. And as I will sometimes say to people, um, I will wash your feet, but you may not wipe your feet on me. We need boundaries. We need to
Mm.
say, we are able to offer what we can offer so long as it is not violated. And I think that for the person coming in, that means respecting the fact that this is a religious society of friends, a religion being when a group of people in common set structures for how spiritual development can unfold. It's like spirituality is a wild vine that grows along the ground, but a religion is a trellis that allows it to grow up and for the vine to reach towards the sun and for the grapes to ripen and make strong wine that is spiritually inebriating. Um, that's how we need to be. I think, in a way, it needs more courage in what it means to be a friend, what it means to be a Quaker, what it means to speak to the truth of God, the truth of the heart, not to be afraid of speaking of God, of Christ, and also of other faith perspectives, and also honoring people's doubts, but saying fundamentally, friends, this is what we are here about. We are following or seeking to follow the way, the truth, and the life. So I hope that our society can evolve in that way. It Friend's house worries me. I don't see much coming out of it that I feel really speaks to me. Um, it worries me that our recording clerk has on his Twitter profile, or he's probably come off it now, but he had on it, the nearest thing friends have to a CEO. Well, very frankly, we have nothing like a CEO. We have the movement of the Holy Spirit at the heart of it.
Yeah.
And I should think we need to be very wary of managerialism in that respect. At the same time, I accept that I've not been part of the processes that have led to managerialist decisions being taken in the past. And therefore, I have to be careful what I say and how I say it about that. But I would simply appeal to people at all levels in our society, and especially if they're trusted with employed positions. Remember, it is the Holy Spirit of God. It is the Spirit of Christ moving amongst us that we are here to bear witness to. And if you are in doubt about that, consider staying your hand. Consider not using your position to diminish how that might be expressed. We are all guests on this earth. We are all sojourners. We are all pilgrims on the way. And be wary of beating paths which might be led from some place other than the discerned movement of the Holy Spirit in community with one another. That is what is so distinctive about us. It's not just what I think the Spirit is saying, with the risk of my ego inevitably being conflated. It is that discernment. That is why, Emma, during COP26, when it was held here in Glasgow in 2021, Varen, my wife, and I, what we did using our meeting house and with the support of our meeting, is we put on a number of training sessions in the Quaker process of meeting for clearness. So much needed by activists. There's a wonderful American book here. It's out of print, but you can get it online, Insight and Action. And it's subtitled How to Discover and Support a Life of Integrity and Commitment to Change. It's about doing activism from a spiritually discerned place. And about half of this book is drawing on Quaker ways and representing them a bit like Parker Palmer does
Mm.
towards a contemporary way of thinking. But let's not lose the spiritual heart of that. Can I just go into one other area, which is about activism? As I say, if you go on my website, you'll see my writings on that kind of thing. Um, I see a lot of a lot of my work. I've written about a dozen books, um, Soil and Soul and Fortune's Pilgrimage. Uh, my best known one, if I can just show you there. But this is about land reform and community, but spiritual reform. It's about doing liberation theology. Porteous pilgrimage deeply into the spirituality of it. Was my climate change activist friend Matt Carmichael's spiritual activism, the spiritual basis of activism, of social action for change. And I do think that this is very important, provided it is grounded in that mystical spirituality. It is the movement of the spirit that comes first.
Mm.
Then your work in the world is shaped and brought into balance. Then your work in the world, in my case, was land reform, was poverty issues, was climate change, um, and also non-violence when I give lectures to the military on non-violence. Then you come from a place that speaks to people from beyond words, and you get a traction that is not like ordinary traction.
Mm.
You're into the genuine charismatic, the charism being the gift of the spirit, the movement of the spirit. You're into the genuine charismatic, cycling back to my mentor, Archbishop Virgil Patrick Coopers in Papua New Guinea, where he spoke about the charismatic aspect of the Holy Spirit being what is so important, as distinct from the kind of charisma of celebrity, which is what Richard Rohr, the Franciscan priest, calls the false liminal, the false threshold into the mystical. Now, this is what I think we have to teach. This is what what I am called to teach, what I give all my time to doing, because whenever I work in an area, whenever I'm asked to speak about something, I say yes, provided I can tie it into the spiritual. And they say, what? And I explain what I mean, and I say, well, you can either have me speak at your conference or not. And they say, oh, well, all right then. And then it comes out. I'm working just now on this paper here. I was asked by Highland Palestine, Palestinian Solidarity from the Highlands of Scotland. I was asked to speak with the Nobel Peace Prize nominee, Professor Manzin Kumise, and his wife, Jessie Chang, recently. And I said, okay, I'll speak on how I see the Israel-Palestine situation if I can speak to it from a spiritual perspective, and specifically the calling to Israel to be a light unto the nations. And that's it. That'll be published in the journal Theology in Scotland in the spring. And it's kind of like I could sense their nervousness, and they acknowledged, my hosts acknowledged that. But then they see why. We need to show people why. We can only do that from being grounded in a place of constant prayer. What does it mean to be in prayer? It means to be asking that you be held in the hand of God. It means that you hold the world around you, and especially the things that give you difficulty, in that hand of God, or you inwardly ask that they be held in that hand of God, our ground of being, which art in heaven. Heaven is a reality. Heaven is a possibility. Hallowed be thy name. Holy be thy name. We have to recognize it for what it is. Let's not play games. Let us acknowledge we're dealing with a holy reality. Um, Thy community come on earth. What's meant by kingdom? Basilica in the Greek. What was meant was community. Thy community come, thy will, thine opening of the way, thy dharma, thy way, the truth, and the life be done on earth as is in heaven. Your hypostatic union, your incarnation, your infusion of the spirit and matter in one reality. On earth as is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Daily, epiousion in the Greek. Epi as in epicenter, bang on top of, top dead center. TDC if you're a mechanic, the point at which the spark comes in an engine, a top dead center to thrust the piston into action and give locomotive force. Give us this day our daily bread, that which speaks to the essence, ousion, the essence, the bread that speaks to the essence that gives life. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us in the King James translation, which is very apt and used in Scottish churches, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Well, let's double translate that one. Forgive us our karma as we forgive those who hold us in karmic bonds. Our debts, the Greek suggests a sense of obligation. Karma is the obligation of action and reaction. Forgive it, let it go, let us start afresh, dissolve it, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. There we get into some very deep theology, which Carl Jung understood. Lead us not into temptation. Why would God lead you into temptation? Because Jung suggests, as we see with Abraham pleading for Sodom and Gomorrah, if I can find only 100 good men, will you forgive the city? If I can find only 10, haggling with God, saying to God, far be it from you to be like that. If you're going to be God, live up to what God is. Hence that importance of the hypostatic union. Because God's, I risk being heretical here, God's self can only understand what God means through the fullness of being human in solidarity in our suffering with us. Why the suffering? Why evil? Why is that allowed? If there is a God, would God not cosmically zap things? Would God not wrap your car in cotton wool before you smash into the teenage crazy coming round the corner? Or some such. No, God permits freedom. You can only have true love if it is free love. So God doesn't cause evil to happen, but permits evil to happen. Mm. And it is for us through the processes of forgiveness to transcend into what it means to be the God that allows the creation to unfold, allows evolution to unfold, so that, as, as George Fox put it, the creation was opened to me. There we go. Go well.
Thank you, Alastair. I mean, I just wish that we had more ministry as full and as deep and as theological as that, week in, week out. And we don't, and we're the weaker for it. That's my main wish, that what you have just said, that something that the society can learn from in its day-to-day struggles, whether to stay on Twitter, these these,
Did
these
did you see my
decisions.
letter in the Friend this week about that?
No.
Oh, I've got, hang on, which one is it? Is it, um, oh, it's downstairs. See, I've got a letter in the Friend about that, basically quoting St. Siluan of Mount Athos, where he says, keep keep your spirit in hell and despair not. But it's quite curious, and I was inclined to write a letter of correction to the Friend, but I decided, oh, here we are. Here we are. That's first edition of the year here. The letter's headed Quaker Testament. Sorry, the letter is headed X Twitter on 16th on, on 16th December. Friends House announced that along with a raft of other Quaker organizations, it is disengaging from X Twitter. This because, quote, the disinformation and hate on this platform mean that it is no longer a useful communication tool for us. X Twitter has between 400 million users and 600 million. Blue Sky has 25 million, a difference of at least 16-fold. Might we not maintain a foothold on both platforms? Might we not be mindful of the Jungian shadow if we filter for purity? Christ was on both Blue Sky and X Twitter. Witness the tweet-length Beatitudes. We too are called to presence in a broken world and not to sit in silos in a holy huddle. As our Nobel Peace Prize citation quoted it in 1947, the Quaker way is to build up in a spirit of love what has been destroyed in a spirit of hatred. God has angels enough in heaven. As St. Siluan of Mount Athos put it, keep thy mind in hell and despair not.
Mm.
But I'll tell you one last thing, Emma. I almost wrote back to them. I decided not to because, editors tweak things for reasons that are often good reasons, and you don't want to be slapping folk on the wrist. The actual quotation I used, using the translation from Paul Evdokimov there, was keep thy spirit in hell and despair not. And they've obviously looked it up and they've come across one of the more secular translations that you'll find, keep thy mind in hell. But there's a difference between mind and spirit. And so,
Are you
that,
telling me that the editor has changed the quotation from spirit to mind?
yeah, yeah. But I suspect, with fairness to the editor, I suspect what's happened is that the editor probably has got a policy of checking out quotations to see that they're valid. Because you get so many false quotations. Einstein said this,
No.
and he
No,
never.
Alistair, you're being too kind there. This is the exact kind of problem we're seeing everywhere, and it drives me mad. And thank you for giving us that example because, you know, this is just ridiculous. And it deeply worries me that we have these kinds of decisions being made. Um, Thank you for shining a light on both of those.
Uh, well, I use the version that Evdokimov, a Russian Orthodox, uses here. Keep thy spirit in hell and despair not keep thy mind in hell. But I mean, these are the kind of things that are problematic. But at the same time, I just thought to myself, probably because if you Google the quotation, you'll find both versions, and there's plenty that say mine. And the editors probably thought, oh, McIntosh has got that not quite right. And, busy
Well,
editors, they're short-staffed. I don't know. I thought I'm not going to write and
it makes
complain
me
because
think of
they've got enough on their minds. And their friend does a very good job. Do subscribe to it, folks.
It makes me think of kind of transcribers of the Bible, and some junior monk thinking he can improve the
That's it.
translation somewhat.
Well, the junior monk got a hold of it, but forgiveness, not 7 times, but 7 times 70, Emma. On which we should perhaps
Well,
bow out.
indeed, indeed. And we forgive them. But thank you so much for your
Oh,
time
it's
today.
been a delight, and thank you to those folk who might still be listening at the end of this.
Indeed.
Goodness, we said an hour, so we've
I
overshot a wee bit, but
I'm
there we
sure
go.
people will be wrapped by that. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, go well. Bye bye now.